Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Okay, so welcome to this session. This is a session focusing on astrophysical plasma. I am Vikram. I am faculty in the physics department here. I work on astrophysics, and that is why this session was assigned to me. Uh, our first speaker is Professor Ram Prasad Prajapati. He is from the School of Physical Science of Jawaharlal. His work focuses on theoretical studies of waves, instability, structure formation in space, and astrophysical plasma. He'll be talking about kinetic and fluid descriptions of genes instability in collisionally kappa distributed processes.
Thank you, Dr. Vikram, for this introduction. So, good morning to all of you on the third day of 40th PSSI National Symposium on Plasma Science and Technology. Going to deliver my talk on the genes kinetic and fluid descriptions of genes instability in collision-less kappa distributed suprathermal plasma. This work is done by my research scholar Pooja. So, this work presents here both the kinetic and fluid aspects of the genes instability, especially in the suprathermal non-Maxwellian kappa distributed plasma. So, these are the outlines of my talk. First, I will talk brief about the genes gravitational instability and its significance in the structure formation in the interstellar medium, that covers a range of object in the sense beginning from the formation of the gaseous molecules and then galaxies, everything in the Big Bang model. Then something about the characteristic of suprathermal particles, the species which are having the energy range larger than the Maxwellian particles. So they have some kind of distinguished features in terms of their statistics, thermodynamics, so that they modify different phenomena in the astrophysical plasmas. Then kinetic description of gene instability using the well-known Vlasov-Poisson equation system, that is analytically solved here to just calculate analytically the growth rate instability criteria, which are well compared with the fluid description in the next section, in which we consider a fluid description considering the modified equation of state for the kappa distributed plasma. Then have some astrophysical applications, particularly in the circumgalactic medium, which is a medium which covers the galaxies, halo, which contains the suprathermal particles of energy having more than keV. And then closing remarks. So, as we all know that the structure formations in the universe is because of the various kinds of instabilities that takes place, and out of that the gravitational instability is the fundamental one which plays very important role. So since the Big Bang, the beginning of the Big Bang, that is the singularity, after these electro and weak forces, the last force which come into the picture, that is the gravitational force, which is responsible for the clump formation and the gas cloud formation, then subsequent star formation. So particularly we talk about the stellar evolution starting from the pre-star formation, Tori star, and then main sequence star to the end stage of the stars, that is the dense stars, white dwarf and the neutron stars. So in these stellar evolutions, there is a huge significance of the gravitational instability that can be analytically studied using the fluid descriptions. So this instability was first discussed by the James Jeans, and the idea is very simple, that whenever a self-gravitating gas cloud is there and the plasma is forming in that one because of the nuclear fusion, so this gas cloud is basically supported via the gravitational field, and there is a gas pressure inside it that acts in the outward direction. So there is a competition between the gas pressure that acts in the radially outward direction and the gravity which acts in the inward direction. So at a time a situation comes that when these two pressure balances together, so a hydrodynamic equilibrium situation is achieved. So using the simple Euler equation, if we include here the force due to the gravitational potential, so we can discuss the equilibrium by putting all the temporal variations equals to 0. So we can have this kind of equilibrium conditions here. So using the analytical tools, we get the criteria of instability, that is not, but it is basically, it tells about the length scale or size of the system beyond which a system can be gravitationally unstable. So Jeans has discussed these criteria first, and then later by Chandrasekhar used this phenomena to give the Chandrasekhar mass limit, especially for the dense white dwarf stars. So this Jeans instability has a lot of applications. I am particularly focusing on the application in interstellar media, where there is a formation of the galaxies or group of galaxies, that is galaxy clusters, stars, molecular clouds and nebula. There are various other astrophysical objects like the protoplanetary disk or accretion disk, where there is a huge gravity and the plasma medium is under the influence of gravity. So one can not ignore the role of self gravitation and the gravitational instability there. So where the star formation takes place initially, so if we talk about the interstellar medium, so in interstellar medium there are various gases and mainly the composition is hydrogen gas there. So a region where particularly the star formation takes place is the molecular cloud, especially in the ionized region, that is the H2 region. So molecular cloud is basically, you can say, is a site of the star formation, which is basically preliminary, its temperature is very low. So we have a range of molecular clouds, different types of nebulas there, like diffuse, reflection, transmission nebula, having different temperature plasma parameters. So initially when there is a cold molecular cloud is there, which are having temperature few Kelvin, in that there is a huge gravitation, and because of that gravitational contraction, that is in principally called the Helmholtz contraction. So the Helmholtz contraction is the basic phenomena that converts the gravitational energy into the kinetic one, and that necessitate the condition for the nuclear fusion that raises the temperature of the molecular cloud. So once these conditions are achieved, because of the Helmholtz contraction, the gravitational energy converts into kinetic one. So the necessary temperature required for the fusion is achieved there, and then the competition begins between the gas pressure, plasma pressure and the gravitational collapse. So the molecular clouds are basically a dense region where the density is up to 10 power 4 to 10 power 5 atom. So there is a variation of density again, and in this way the perfect conditions for the gravitational collapse is achieved there. So once the fusion starts there, plasma form there and the collapse start there. So the stellar evolution begins there. So starting from the initial phase of proto star, and then the next phase Tori star, like that. So this, with this pictorial picture, you can say you can here see that the molecular cloud in which the plasma forms here. So this hydrostatic equilibrium is achieved in the condition when this both pressure balances together, and then subsequently when the gravitational instability observed here, that is when the gas pressure is not enough to prevent the gravitational force. So here the collapse occur and the star formation takes place. So what is the way to study it analytically? So James Jeans has very interestingly studied this problem using a simple hydrodynamic set of equations. So there are three fundamental equations, like equation of motion, which is the Euler equation modified due to the gravity, Newtonian gravity, and the continuity equation and equation of state. So we assume the simple hydrodynamic set of equations for this gaseous plasma, and these are linearly perturbed, and we get the analytical dispersion relation. So there are three equations in terms of three variables like velocity, density and the pressure. So these are reduced into a single equation, that is called the density perturbation equations. So assuming the density varying exponentially, we can get a very simple dispersion relation. So you can see here there is an additional term here 4 pi 0. If you see dimensionally, so it is nothing but the square of the frequency. If we remove this self gravitation part, so we get simply here the phase speed of that wave mode, that is nothing but the sound speed. You can say that in ordinary gaseous media. So what makes this term very special is that here, that if there is no any term, so we get always a positive phase speed here, omega by k is equals to Cs. But whenever there is an inclusion of gravity here, so the root of this equation can be imaginary real. If this is imaginary for this RHS term say less than 0, so we can have here the growth rate. The ultimately the term for negative imaginary root becomes positive. So we will get here the exponentially growing mod. These exponentially growing mods are called here the gravitational instabilities. So theoretically we can study the Jeans instability problem using this simple analytical tool that gives here the critical Jeans wave number. So for this condition, if this is less than 0, we can say that here for all the perturbation wave numbers which are less than this number, or in terms of the length, that is called the Jeans length, the perturbation will be gravitationally unstable for all the wave number less than this length, but this is nothing but it is the Jeans length here. So let us come to our work, that is the suprathermal particles. So suprathermal species are very interesting species. I have told you that we have the range of astrophysical systems where temperature of the plasma particles may be few eV to keV are greater than that. So these suprathermal particles are basically the particles whose kinetic energy is very large as compared to their thermal energy. So if we say their statistics, so that statistics is just basically differentiate or deviate from the Maxwellian one, and they follow here the non-Maxwellian distribution, which is called the kappa distribution, that has a power law term that in terms of the kappa index. So these particles, because there are several mechanisms in the previous talks, some authors, the speakers, they have told about the magnetic reconnection, particle acceleration phenomena. So these are the mechanism by which these particles, they get enormous energy and their behavior becomes non-Maxwellian type. So the particle acceleration or magnetic reconnection, turbulence, and there are various phenomena by wave particle interaction by which they get enormous energy. So these particles have generally they behave like collisionless particles. Their collisions are almost negligible here, and their mean free path is very large. In terms of the energy, we have the range of suprathermal particles. If we see in terms of the solar wind, so we have the solar wind particles having energy 10 eV to 10 keV, or in the solar energetic particles, we have the energy 10 keV to 10 MeV. And in other intra-cluster medium and circumgalactic medium, we have particles having 100 eV to 10 keV. So what is the physical significance of this particle? Because they are having the high energy, so their flux can influence the momentum transfer and wave spectra, instabilities, everything. And they are important in the solar wind corona or in the supernova remnant shock precursors, ISM, ICM, circumgalactic medium, and accretion flows. So because of their behavior, which is deviated from the Maxwellian one, having large energy, and they follow the kappa distribution, their statistics become very important in these astrophysical systems. So these statistics of this type of particles, which are described by the non-Maxwellian kappa distribution, that is a general distribution function for the non-equilibrium weakly collisional plasma, first given by this in this study. So this kappa distribution basically captures the high energy tails that is not described generally by the Maxwellian one. In the next slide I will explain you. So mathematically this suprathermal kappa distribution function is basically expressed in terms of the power laws of the kappa index. So this kappa index is basically a number here which is range from 3/2 to infinity. So here the significance of this kappa is that the lower of the value of kappa represent the suprathermal regime, and as we go in the higher regime, so that is the Maxwellian regime. So this is the distribution function we generally consider. One can reduce this distribution function from non-Maxwellian to Maxwellian one also. So if you go into the region of large kappa value, that is kappa tends to infinity, so this gives the Maxwellian distribution here. So generally for the suprathermal limit, we consider the low value of kappa, that is greater than 3/2, but not so much high, that is 2 to 6 we consider here. So this is the comparison between the Maxwellian distribution and the non-Maxwellian kappa distribution. So in the thermal plasma or Maxwellian plasma, generally the particles, they obey this kind of Maxwellian distribution, which has generally exponential tail, and all the particles, their mean thermal energy lies between this regime here. So this, there is a narrow curve for the Maxwellian distribution. So all the particles, they are basically clustered around this near this mean energy here. But in case of the kappa, this represents a power tail, because the particles are having here large energy. So they here follow these long energy tails of this velocity distribution function, and they, this is significant for the all the particles which are having higher energy and at large value of. So what is the mathematical changes occurs here because of this distribution which are followed by the particles. So we can have some basic plasma parameters here, like the number density, temperature, and escaping flux. So in the Maxwellian, these are the, this is the representation of the number density or temperature and the flux. So in the kappa distribution, they are slightly modified by this kappa index. So you are having your choice that putting the different values of kappa, you can go to the suprathermal limits here. So this escaping flux here and other parameters here, which is the flux represented by these particles, outgoing particles, that is required to escape the limit, required the potential escape, required potential or flux required to remove from this gravitational or any kind of potential, that also depends upon the kappa. So how to study the Jeans instability for such a astrophysical system where the particles generally obey the non-Maxwellian kappa distribution? So we first study with the kinetic description, that is here a combination of the Vlasov-Poisson equation. So we consider here a infinitely gravitating collisionless gas which consists here suprathermal particles, and these particles, they obey here the kappa distribution function. So their dynamics we generally discuss using these two equations, Vlasov-Poisson equation for collisionless particles, no collisions are included. So that is represented in terms of the velocity distribution function f, and here phi is the gravitational potential which is here supplemented by this Poisson equation. So using the simple linear perturbation method, we linearly perturb these two equations here, and we get the linearized perturbation equations, and assuming the similar perturbation which are considered previously to get the analytical dispersion relation of Jeans instability, we get a simplified form of the dispersion relation, that is this one here. So there are two important factors here, that is this, first is this term here, that is the derivative of this equilibrium kappa distribution function, and the denominator generally represents here the Landau damping phenomena also. So this two we will discuss here in detail. So what we do next, we substitute here the our suprathermal distribution function, and we solve this mathematically. So there is a very rigorous mathematical calculations. So we generally use here the cylindrical coordinates to solve this integral, that is solved first for the parallel perpendicular component of the velocity and then parallel component, and with some simplified assumptions we get finally this form of the dispersion relation. So you can see here the two important features of this dispersion relation. One is the here a non-Maxwellian shape of the equilibrium through this algebraic tail of this term 1 plus v square by kappa theta. This theta is the kappa modified speed of the particles here, and the denominator represents here basically it is a resonator term that generally generates the kinetic Landau effect. So in the limit when we consider suppose this denominator term that is equals to 0, so we get the well known Landau damping phenomena, that is if this is equals to 0, so that is kV is equals to omega, so we get here the phase speed of the wave, that is nothing but it is equals to the particle velocity. So in this case when the particle velocity is equals to the phase speed of the wave, so we get a resonance condition here. So there is a possibility of exchange of energy, that is the particle, they can exchange the energy with this wave mod here, and we get here the Landau damping, well known kinetic phenomena, that is called the kinetic Landau damping. So the solution of this integral mainly depends upon this term also, that is the Landau. That's why sometimes we use the Landau contour integral to solve this integration, and that solution is generally given in terms of the beta and gamma functions. So a very rigorous mathematical calculation is required. We can have the numerical solutions also to solve this dispersion relation. So let us make this easy. Suppose we want to get the instability criteria. So I set here the marginal instability condition, that is putting omega equals to 0, which is the frequency which basically separate the stable and unstable region. So if I put here this omega equals to 0, that is called the marginal instability condition. So we can get this integral in a very simplified form, and after the simplification we get a modified instability criteria, that is we get the perturbation wave number k should be less than kj, where kj is the modified expression of Jeans wave number that depends upon this kappa parameter. So first of all, what are the modifications here we obtained? We can clearly see here that if first I want to compare this with the classical Jeans criteria of instability, so we can go into the Maxwellian limit. So considering this equivalent temperature, that is equals to simple Maxwellian temperature, that gives here the this modified thermal speed, nothing but that will become here the sound speed. And for large value of kappa that goes into the Maxwellian limit, we get here the simply this factor that is equals to root 2. So if I substitute here, so I get here the value of theta, that is root 2 kBt by m, and finally we get the kj value, that is equals to omega j by vta. This is the thermal velocity of particle. So this is nothing but this is the classical instability criteria. So now I have choice of going in the higher energy tails. So to calculate the growth rate, we have done some calculations here using some assumptions. So first I have to check whether what is the effect of this kappa parameter. So we can see from this picture here that as the kappa parameter increases here, so there is a significantly decrease in the growth rate of Jeans instability. This is because of here these kappa distributed particles, there is an enhancement in the gas pressure, and that here works against the gravitational collapse that suppresses the growth rate of instability. The same feature we can see in terms of the modified speed, that is dependent again upon the kappa parameter. So here higher up the value represents the lower kappa value. So the same effect we can here see that the kappa parameter or modified thermal speed, it suppresses the growth rate of the instability. To compare it with the fluid description, we have obtained here the modified equation of state using the density distribution for a kappa distributed particles, and there is a theta which is modified temperature here. Again in the Maxwellian limit we can get here the Boltzmann relation for this self gravitating gas. So using this relation we solve this distribution for the phi gravitational potential, and we put in the equation of motion in the steady state condition just to calculate the pressure. By integrating that equation we can calculate the pressure, and finally this pressure comes out to be in this form. So that is the modified pressure for the suprathermal gas, and can be reduced again in the limit of Maxwellian. We can recover the Maxwellian gas pressure relation by putting these limits here. So if I differentiate this with respect to density, so I can get the modified speed here of the suprathermal particles. So this is my modified suprathermal speed of the particle. So with these again we have solved these equations, taking now this suprathermal gas pressure, and we get the modified dispersion relation, which is a fancy dispersion relation we can see here. So this is nothing but a index, you can say that all are the numbers here, but this choice of kappa makes here the wide applicability of this dispersion relation in the higher energy tails. So we have compared this with the classical dispersion relation of Jeans instability. So now I have choice to vary the value of this kappa index, and I can study the modified Jeans instability criteria also. So we find here that the system will be gravitationally unstable for all the perturbation wavelength which are larger than this value, where kj is this one. And in the Maxwellian limit, again we get the classical instability criteria. So the significance of this expression is that the larger contribution from the suprathermal particles or a smaller kappa that indicates here the heavier energy tails, they alter the Jeans instability criterion and that subsequently affect the gravitational collapse and the instability. Obviously, this dispersion relation, this expression is different than the kinetic one which we have obtained, because the assumptions are different in the kinetic theory as compared to the fluid one. So, this dependency of K on Kj on this kappa, it reveals that the suprathermal populations, they enhances basically the effective pressure and thermal support, thereby suppressing the gravitational instability. So we have plotted the growth rate also for the real values of the circumgalactic medium. So again here we see that as this kappa suprathermal index, it increases here. So we go for the higher values, we go towards the Maxwellian regime. So for lower value, that represents here the suprathermal regime. So in the suprathermal limit, the wave number is reduced here. So that is, wave number is reduced, that is the wavelength is increased. So that is, we can use these analytical solutions to discuss the gravitational collapse in the larger scale. So as kappa here decrease, that is suprathermality increases, so the growth rate is also suppressed, that is studied in this contour map. So this region represent here the unstable region. So we can see that for the larger value of kappa, we have here the more unstable region, but for the lower value of the kappa, we have the here larger we have the larger region of stability. So here the low value of kappa approaching the suprathermal limit, the stable region increases here, and it indicates that in the suprathermal limit the growth rate of Jeans instability is suppressed. That is compared with the kinetic solutions also, and it is matched with the classical results. So as the wave number in kappa increases, the growth rate of the instability also increases. That is, as we reach towards the Maxwellian regime, so we have the more unstable region here. So for the astrophysical application, we have considered these solutions for the case of circumgalactic medium, which is a low density multiphase gaseous medium surrounding the gas. So it acts as a reservoir of hot particles that regulates the gas inflow, outflow, and galaxy evolutions. So here the suprathermal particles have the hot energetic particles, and their energy is 1 keV. So there is a perfect condition for the gravitational collapse. So taking the relevant parameter of the circumgalactic medium, we have calculated here the Jeans frequency, the Jeans wavelength, and the Jeans wave number, which are comes to be out of this order like this. So that is comparable with the length scale of the circumgalactic medium also. These are the closing remarks. So in this study, we have just made an attempt to analytically study the gravitational collapse Jeans instability for the kappa distributed collision less plasma. No collision is included. We have here presented both the fluid version as well as the kinetic version, and the results are compared here. And finally, we see here that the kappa modified instability criteria, which are derived using the kinetic and fluid description, they are well compared with the Maxwellian in the Maxwellian limit also, that is for large kappa. And the strong suprathermality basically suppresses, because there is an enhancement in the gas pressure, so that suppresses the growth rate of gravitational instability. So there is one application here of this suprathermal particle in the CGM medium, but if we particularly talk about the non-gravitating medium, so lots of applications are there in the space plasma, where mainly the particles, they are the non-Maxwellian particles. So various other things like the kinetic alpine wave, or the magnetic reconnection, and solar coronal heating, various studies we have worked previously, especially for the non-suprathermal cases, so that we can later extend with some numerical calculations and some simulation, we can get a better picture of this. So thank you very much for your kind attention, and this is the work supported by the ANRF. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very interesting talk, especially like it seems like you could modify the genes length under this, right?
Thank
So we have few minutes for the
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. So I have a question regarding which one is more appropriate, kinetic treatment or
Yeah,
fluid
of course,
treatment?
kinetic one is more appropriate because in the kinetic description, there is a velocity distribution we are considering. So we
Okay.
can go up to the kinetic scale, and the results are well accurately explained. So because in the fluid approximation, there are various assumptions we consider, which are generally not there. The second thing is that using the kinetic one, we can discuss the non-linearity also. That is not generally discussed using the fluid theory. So the kinetic in the non-linear regime, the kinetic theory gives the better results, I think. So several studies are done by previous authors also, Trigger
Regarding
and
wave particle interaction, Landau
yeah,
damping,
wave
etc.
particle, Landau damping, which cannot be studied using the fluid description.
Okay. Apart from this, do you have any such decisive parameters where from the kinetic regime, if you make that term zero asymptotic, then it will directly recover?
No,
Will
no.
got?
Yeah, there is a one possibility. I have shown that in the case of Maxwellian plasma, if you go for the higher values of kappa,
Maxwell,
so
the
that
kappa tends to one, what we have given,
kappa
kappa
tends to
tends to
infinity.
infinity, then
Yes,
it recovers the earlier Maxwell.
yes, yes. We have compared also several times. So in that limit also that integration can be solved. So if you goes for the higher values of kappa,
Okay.
so we have compared that how the kappa distribution function matches with the Maxwellian one also. Even dispersion relation, instability criteria, everything we can compare.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have comments and questions of.
Yeah,
So,
please,
for the
welcome.
moment, I look like this is a laser produced plasma lecture, not the astrophysics plasma. So a lot
Right.
of words are very similar that we use in our domain, and we
Yeah.
do produce a lot of superthermal electrons, Landau damping. These are very familiar
Yeah, yeah, of course, in
terms.
laser
Yeah,
plasma.
so thanks for bringing this clarity.
Right.
The question I had is if you look at the particle velocity distribution curve that we had. The superthermal electrons are mostly supposed to be born at the core of the system. Where are they born?
Core of the system only.
Yeah. So if you look at this cloud where this
Yeah,
radiation
yeah.
emission happening, so where are
Generally,
they born?
these are particles which are located at the core or maybe outer of the core, like in solar wind. If you see, so in the solar wind, the particle, because of this particle heating mechanism, they achieve the suprathermal limits here. But in the regime like this circumgalactic medium I have discussed here, so because the particles when they will go towards the core side or in the outer side, so they get the acceleration, their energy is increased there, so they achieve the suprathermal. But in between in the interior regime, the particles generally they obey the Maxwellian one. Like for example, in case of sun we see, so the Maxwellian distribution that is sufficient there to discuss. But as due to the coronal mass ejection and everything, when the particles they
Yes.
are accelerated,
So, yeah, in the
so
exterior, of course, highly collisionless.
yeah,
But I assume that the density is very high.
yes,
Why they don't go? Well, because in the drift-free region, they have long been passed.
in
There's nothing
particular in
happening.
which system you are talking?
This cloud here, the gas cloud.
Yeah, actually this is a general picture I have explained you, but that varies depending upon your system, which system you are considering. Particularly if we are talking about the sun, so in the sun there are various zones are there, radiative zones are there, for everything is there. So the nature and the distribution of the particles, it depends upon that which systems you are considering here. So some systems in which there may be particles in the interior one, but in the solar wind or heliosphere, the properties of these particles, their energy, everything varies there. So for a particular system, the statistics or the properties varies basic.
Time for one more question. We'll have one. Two more.
Very nice presentation.
Thank.
So I think here you have ignored collisions, but do you think that when you are applying fluid model, is there possibility to, even though it's not accurate when it comes to exactly mimicking the kappa distribution, but then can we include also
Yeah,
uh,
definitely.
collisions? Another thing is that as this cloud is collapsing due to gravity, so I'm assuming that the particles will have some very high velocities. So do you think that at some stage there can be some relativistic corrections in these calculations? Or
Yeah, your both the questions are very interesting. So your first questions regarding the inclusion of the collisions, so that can be done certainly in the fluid description. We have already done it. So if you want to do it in the kinetic description, so there is a study that is about the kinetic instability, Jeans instability, including collision terms. So we have to use the Boltzmann-Vlasov equation. We have to include the collision term in the right hand side. That can be again solved using the same method here. The question is that the problem is that here when we include the suprathermal particles, so the major problem is to solve analytically that integral. So when we include the collision, so that makes your system very complicated. But even though we can solve it numerically, no problem. Then about the relativistic velocity, yes, of course, yesterday my student gave the talk on relative instability. So in dense plasma, once the system is suppressed, so the gravitational field becomes very, very large. So when the suppression occurs, their volume reduces, so obviously the velocity increases, particle velocity. So in the dense stuff like white dwarf, it reaches up to the relativistic limit. So that's why there the plasma is having the ultra relativistic degenerate plasma. The electrons, they are having the ultra relativistic. So there, I don't think I have not seen such a paper in dense plasma environment where the suprathermal particles are considered. So both questions are different, I think, but yeah, we can have the relativistic velocity and relativistic correction far as concerned the fluid description of the plasma.
Okay, one last.
Particles are only electrons or they are suprathermal ions also?
Yeah, these are basically the ions.
These are the ions.
Ah.
These are not electrons.
Because the waves which are here produced, these are because of these ions, protons mainly, suprathermal protons.
Okay. And the second thing is that just to understand that what physical mechanism sustains the kappa distribution, why it is not collapse into a Maxwell distribution.
That is that first of all, it is their high energy. That is the one of the reason, because they follow the long energy tail of the distribution, which is not satisfied by this Maxwellian one. So their energy is above their average thermal energy. So because of their high energy, basically they follow these long energy tails of the distribution. So this kappa distribution function, which is the deviated distribution from the Maxwellian one in terms of the power law of this kappa. So that is only the difference here. But rest of other plasma parameters, as I have shown in the previous slide, they all are modified due to this kappa index. One can reduce those results. I have shown, I think you were not there. So depends upon which star you are talking. There is a stellar revolution, whole stellar revolution. If you are talking about the mature stage of the stars, obviously because without instability there cannot be any structure formation in the universe. If you are talking about the equilibrium or hydrostatic equilibrium, then stability is important. But again, it will go into the unstable state. After this equilibrium, there will be again unstable situation. It will be further collapse when the gravity will dominate. So it will go into its next phase, maybe up to wide dwarf neutron star. Again, there is a equilibrium there, but it will collapse into the black hole. So both are there is a time frame for that. So that is both the things are there.
Okay, so in the interest of time, we are not taking any more questions, but I see there is huge interest in the audience. So Professor Ram Prasad Prajapati, I would suggest you to talk to him after
Yeah,
the talk.
sure.
After
Thank
the
you.
talk, let's deep break.
Thank you.
We have one memento here for every invited speaker. Shall be presenting it to you.
Thank you, Vikram. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.